just before starting this show, I was watching television. Come on, I'm in my 70s. We still do that. I was watching the last Bill Maher show. So that would have been May the 8th of 2026, if you're listening in the far future. And one of his guests was Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania, whom I've always sort of liked. I mean, I love it that he dresses the way he wants to dress and that he doesn't always agree with people in his own party, and yet he stands firm by the values of his own party. But oh my goodness, he's off on a tangent that I found so disturbing. He seems to want to outlaw faux meat. Now, I'm unclear on whether we're talking only the cultured meat that's really an animal product that doesn't involve animals, or if he's talking about Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers, which I don't really eat myself, but gosh, my husband likes one every now and then. And I want to say, well, whose business is it if somebody wants to eat a Beyond Burger? But here's the real thing, and this is why I'm sharing this with you today. When Bill Maher kind of pressed the senator said, of course, I oppose factory farming. Now, Bill did not respond with what I would have responded with, which is, it's all factory farming. Okay, maybe there are 2% of farms where the animals aren't tortured until they die, but that's 2%. And that's a very expensive 2%. And yet, I have to say, almost everybody I know who eats animal products is convinced that the ones that they eat are the 2%. Now, math was never my strong suit, but I have to say on that one, the math just doesn't work. Welcome to the Main Street Vegan Podcast. I am Victoria Moran, your host, and I'm so happy to be welcoming someone to the program today who hasn't been here for a long, long time, way too long, and that is Dr. Will Tuttle, author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet. He also has a new book now called Food for Freedom. He is a recipient of the Courage of Conscience Award and the Empty Cages Prize. He's a former Zen monk, and with his spouse Madeline, a Swiss visionary artist, he has delivered thousands of lectures in all 50 states and 50 countries around the world. And some of those include beautiful music, because Dr. Tuttle is also a concert pianist. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Victoria. Thanks everyone for watching us and listening.
Oh, it's so
Yeah.
nice to see you. So you've been out touring. How long were you hoofing around the world?
Yeah, 5 months.
Okay.
Madeline and I typically go for 5 months every year from November to April. And we stay in the southern warmer parts and go to Florida for about half of that time, probably 2.5 to 3 months.
Yeah.
And some of that time, as you know, we're at Hippocrates Wellness Institute, where we're doing concerts and lectures, people there. And then we go to local groups and spread the vegan message. So it's
Oh,
really well.
that's
Yeah.
so idyllic. This morning I was with Nathaniel Altman. Have you ever crossed paths with
Yes. I mean,
Nathaniel?
I've never met him, but we've corresponded. Yeah, he's a long
Yeah.
time
A great
young
guy. He was
friend.
actually the guest last week
Mm.
with his book, The Genealogy of Plant Foods. But we met this morning and he read my poem. And one of the
Ah,
things he said was that I had traveled a lot and I was going to travel a lot again. And right now I'm not traveling so much, got some family things going on that are keeping me closer to home. But when I hear about 5 months on the road, it just gives me this wonderful sense of how many people we can reach with this message, sometimes just accidentally. I
mm.
think sometimes you reach people just as well at the gas station as,
Right.
in audiences. So did you have any adventures this time? Anything special to share?
Remember, we were down in the Keys and we were getting ready to leave, and a fellow walked by with his daughter, and he saw that on our little camper van that we've we live in, we have a piece of art by Madeline. It's a magnet, and it's got the cover of the World Peace Diet, and it says, if you like to have peace, world peace, then go vegan, give the animals peace and go vegan. And so he struck up a conversation. He said, I'm so interested in finding out more. I've been eating the standard American diet and I just don't feel very good. And so the whole idea for me is that we can plant seeds. We don't try to change the person right there. We just say, you know what? It's a great thing. I've been a vegan now for 46 years, and it's been fantastic. And I have a new book. This one here, The World Peace Way, which is kind of practical things. The other two books are more philosophical, and that's good. That's the why. This is more the how. And so we have those kinds of things happening. Just striking up conversations with people. Besides the regular events and lectures and workshops and presentations and concerts and things. And I just love doing public events, really. I love doing public events and speaking, but I think these private things where you're just talking to someone are fantastic opportunities also. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's nice. When you're just out there in the van, doing things, those kinds of things happen. Yeah.
That's so cool. And the public events too, there is something about the power of oratory. I love that story of Sylvester Graham, who was pushing this message a long, long
Right.
time ago. And I think it was 1830. He was going to speak in Boston, and he was such a great orator that the butchers and the bakers, because he didn't only disapprove of meat, he
Right.
disapproved of refined flour, they were just thought he's going to run us out of business. So they tried to get together and keep him from having a venue. And I just love it. And I know you're like that. You move people in these ways. I remember years ago, the audiences you were getting in Taiwan, thousands and thousands of people. So thrilling.
Yeah, you're right. Taiwan and China also. Mainland China. Veganism in many ways really was born, I think, in many ways out of mainland China. And I did quite a bit of research on that. We have a book out called Buddhism and Veganism, and it's really interesting to be traveling every day to a different city in China. I went over there 3 different times with big audiences every day, 500 to 1,000 people.
Mm.
And then they would live stream it to, I think, millions of people too, because
Wow.
the whole Buddhist tradition, when it went from India to China, they never did dairy in China. And they
Mhm.
took a vote kind of early on, the founders of the Buddhist tradition in China, I think it was in about the 7th century, and they just said, no meat, that's it. And that meant no meat, no egg, no dairy for everyone who was a
Yeah,
Buddhist,
yeah.
especially the clergy, the laity, and even the laity, pretty much. It's like, well, if I'm going to do this. And so then it was interesting because then as the time went on, the monks were eating a totally plant-based diet, but they would invite the wealthy people in the area to come to meals, and because they wanted to get a donation to support their meditation practice. And so they really created the first mock meats. When you were talking earlier about the mock meats, they created out of soy and out of wheat, they created, chicken and duck and things to please the wealthy donors and not have to break their precepts of not killing. And that spread really. In Taiwan, my goodness, I think it's the most vegan country in the world in the sense that it's just everywhere, very, very supported. We went to vegan hospitals, vegan schools, huge interest. It really gave me hope that there's
Mm.
definitely a possible future that's vegan for our planet if we just keep these. It's a spiritual thing too. That's something that's very important. I think both you and I think, are somewhat unusual in the vegan movement in that we emphasize the importance of spiritual practice as part of the vegan tradition. And I think that's really important because the Buddha himself, if you read that book, you've maybe read The Light of Asia, where
Hmm.
Edwin Arnold
Edwin
talks
Arnold.
about, yeah, the story of and there's an amazing passage in there because it contrasts so sharply with Christspiracy, this idea that Jesus went to the temple and overthrew the money changers, not because they were cheating, but because they were killing animals. And there's a passage in Light of Asia where the Buddha, before he becomes the Buddha, he's still on his path, but he has a tremendous aura and presence about him. And so as he comes into this kingdom, King Bin Barasa, I think his name is, there's all these sheep and goats going to the Brahmin priest to be sacrificed, and in order to take away the sins of the kingdom and the sins of the king especially. And the Buddha just walks very gracefully, very nobly, and people are all saying, who is that who walks like this and has such majesty? And he walks close, and there's a Brahmin just ready to cut the throat of a goat, and the Buddha just walks up and says, no. And then gives a Dharma talk about how every being yearns for their life. And the difference is striking because the priests are all ashamed. They drop their knives. They say, you're right. The king comes by. He goes, oh my gosh, what a beautiful. He has a whole proclamation throughout the whole kingdom that from now on, no more meat eating ever again, And it's like the seed gets planted. And it's really true. I mean, we go later and we find there was Buddhist kings in India. Ashoka is the most famous one, he wasn't a Buddhist, but he became a Buddhist, and he really promoted what we would call vegetarianism in a big way throughout. And that's really why India really became vegetarian. It's because of the Buddhists, even though Buddhism somewhat died away in India. But the practice of not eating meat was really, in many ways, propelled by these teachings from the Buddha, also from the Jain. And at the same time, we had the Jain tradition also contributing to that. But it's essentially, I think, a spiritual impulse, compassion for other living beings. And to me, it's not so much a social justice. It's social justice, but it's really a heart understanding that there's one life and it lives through all of us. And when we honor it in ourselves, we can't help but honor it in others. And I think that's such an important perspective for our movement now. Yeah. Yeah.
To me, that's where it's always been. That's where it came from the beginning. And
Right.
I think, interestingly enough, it used to be, oh, don't get spiritual, you'll scare people. But I actually think now that social justice is scary to a lot of people because all these wonderful concepts have kind of morphed in some instances into something that they never set out to be. And, we've talked about this before, that at the heart of all the wisdom traditions, there is this idea of just what you're talking about, the one life. And one of the things that I just love from history is why so many of the early Christians were vegetarian. Because if you just look at the Gospels, that wasn't something Jesus talked about. But for whatever reason, within the first 150, 200 years after he was on this planet, there was this huge skyrocketing of vegetarianism, which probably at that time was veganism, among his followers. And some
Right.
people say, well, they were trying to be aesthetic and they were trying to give things up, and that may have been true too. But I think it's if you put that kind of love and power on the world in the form of somebody, that's going to last a while and cause people to do things differently.
Yes, exactly. And I think that teaching, you had, I think, James Benefico on recently talking
Hmm.
about the whole movement within the early Christians. That was the people that wrote about them, the early writers Epiphanius and Tertullian and Josephus and all these people. They all said, yeah, they don't eat meat. That was well understood, and that got covered up. I think it really
Yeah.
got covered up, and we see it
Yeah.
in Unity. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore early on proclaimed not eating meat as part of their teachings, and within
Mhm.
just a few decades, it's been covered up. And so it's one of those things we want to make the teachings accessible, and so we just cover up the things perhaps that we don't agree with or we think are going to make it a little more hard to swallow. But I think that real purity and sticking with the spirit of authentic spirituality pays off ultimately, and we shouldn't dilute the message, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just love seeing it crop up in unexpected places. There, a group of Orthodox Jews in New York City who have tables out on the street, and they will always very politely say, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" And I'm not, so I would say no. But I got curious, and one day I said yes, and they gave me this pamphlet. And they have a teacher that they believe is the Messiah, but it listed, whatever you think about that, it listed their precepts. And one of them was, you don't eat animals
Hmm.
because you can't have peace as long as you're causing this kind of harm. And it's like, okay, I don't know if he's a Messiah, but I know he's a really good guy. And there's this
Right.
kind of wonderful little underground connection that I feel that all of us have who have awakened to this. Now, obviously, we haven't awakened to everything, and we have our flaws and failings, and there are things we're not seeing right, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, there's just something so beautiful about being around people who live and thrive without exploiting animals. What's that about? And of course, that also causes people to say, "Oh, you vegans, you just think you're better than everybody else." It's not better. It's just, what is it? Tell
Well, I
us.
think, yeah, it's a universal wisdom teaching that's been suppressed. And I think, I've been fortunate twice in my life to live in a large vegan community. And both times it was very transformational. Like I left home with my younger brother, Ed, when I was right after college. I had just turned 22. He had just turned 20. And we thought we would attain enlightenment by walking all the way to California from Concord, Massachusetts with no money and just, walking and meditating. And we got as far as Buffalo, New York. And then we just headed south on these little backcountry roads, walking about 15 miles, 20 miles a day. And we ended up walking all the way down through Pennsylvania and New York and West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee. We ended up in Tennessee at the farm. We were still eating meat. We would eat whatever we could get. We didn't have money. We were just sort of doing our best. And sometimes we would go into dumpsters, or we would get, if people had some extra food, we would eat it, because we were mainly meditating on Ramana Maharshi's question of who am I, going deeper and deeper with that question. And when we got to the farm, there was 900 people there. They were mostly from California. And so we felt it was very poetic. We kind of met them there in the middle of the country. And they were all vegetarians. They said, we're vegetarians, but we would call them vegans in the sense that they didn't eat meat or dairy or eggs or even honey. And that was it. I've never eaten meat in my life since being at the farm for a few, maybe 3 weeks, because of their example, their energy, their vitality, and explaining to me how most of the food we're growing, we're feeding to people, to the animals while people are starving, and the cruelty to the animals and so forth. And then the second time was a few years later, in
Oh, but let's
1984.
back up just a
Yeah,
second, Will. I don't mean
sure.
to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
for people who don't know what the farm is,
Oh yeah,
give us
the
a little background.
farm. Right, the farm was the largest hippie commune in the world in 1975. 900 people. They were basically an outgrowth of Stephen Gaskin had something called Monday Night Class in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and he was basically philosophizing about how we could live without war and how we could create a world of kindness and compassion. And he was very much influenced by Zen Buddhism. He was a student of Suzuki Roshi. And so he just started giving these classes in Golden Gate Park, and they would grow from like 20 people to 200 people to like 2,000 people. They would all show up in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco to hear Stephen Gaskin talk about this. And finally they said, well, we should stop having a class about it. Let's do it, And so somebody found some land, like 2,000 acres out about 2 hours south of Nashville in the middle of nowhere in Tennessee. And they took this whole caravan of school buses, and they went out there and they just got into the middle of this place. It was really interesting because we were just walking, and people said, don't go to the farm, don't go there. They're a bunch of hippies and they smoke dope, and don't go there. But we really wanted to go there. And it was great, because they were very respectful of the local people, actually, and tried to really work with them and learn from them and share. But it was something. It's still going. I mean, we were there. I guess it's been about 10 years ago, but we gave a whole weekend training on the World Peace Diet at the farm, and it has the largest vegan book publishing company, I think, in North America. The book publishing company is still based there. They have a lot of good businesses. They had to shift. I'll just say this one thing: from being really a pure vision. Like when we were there, it was a total commune, total cooperative. If you had money, you gave it to them, and then everybody had it together, and you just worked, and everybody got fed, and it was really amazing to do that with 900 people. It got up to about 1,300 people, but then at one point it just got attacked, I think, by the medical establishment, and you have one or two people out of 1,300 that have an expense, and they wouldn't give them health insurance, and so financially they had to change it. So now everybody has to kind of pay a little bit, and you're more responsible for yourself, but it's still a thriving community. And it's really great, I think, to see that kind of thing happening. I wish there were more actual vegan communities where people could actually live and do that, because we lived in an RV for 17 years traveling around North America, and we looked for vegan communities, and we found a few, but there are not many. They were very small. There was one in Arizona with 4 or 5 people, and there's a lot of intentional communities, but not that many that are vegan, that are land-based. It's just rare. It's difficult to do for
Yeah.
some reason. But the other thing is there are some spiritual communities like that, like Thich Nhat Hanh. Most of his monasteries and so forth are vegan. And Supreme Master Ching Hai, she has centers on the land. They own land and they're vegan. And then the Buddhist monasteries, for example, in Taiwan, they're all vegan. In China, they're all vegan. And I went to one in South Korea in 1984. I shaved my head, became a Zen Buddhist monk, went over to practice there, and yeah, it was a total vegan community. No meat, dairy, eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather. Your shoes were made out of vinyl. I mean, they just totally vegan. And it had been like this for 750 years. They had been living a vegan lifestyle, So I realized it's not this new hippie idea from California. It's an ancient wisdom tradition that goes back really thousands of years, at least for sure hundreds of years. People have understood this. If we're really serious about our spiritual practice, about creating a harmonious world, we can't be stabbing and killing animals and eating them. It doesn't go together. Right. But for some reason, most of the spiritual teachers in our world today don't want to talk about this. They would rather, it's the same problem. It's very refreshing to find spiritual teachers who will talk about it and who will really say, look, if you're really serious about meditation practice and creating a world of harmony, go vegan, right? I mean, to me, that seems like a no-brainer. But our culture, it's still, we have it's kind of, I guess for you also, both of us as long-term vegan advocates, to see the difficulty over like 40 or 50 years in growing the percentage of people and the resistance that people have, that the institutions have, is really quite impressive. But I think I don't have any anxiety or angst about it. I just think every day I just do my best, and that's a life well lived. We can't force other people to change. All we can do is change. I can change myself. I can't change somebody else. So I can try to embody what veganism is better always. But I can't say, Joe or Mary, you ought to do this or that, because everybody has their unique spiritual path and has their unique time to do it. And so I think that's the best way to approach this, I think, from the point of view, at least, of our own inner peace.
Yeah. Yes, from the point of view of our inner peace, I absolutely agree with you. Then I think about the animals, and then it just loops back to what can I do to
Right.
reach large numbers of people, or to reach one person who will kind of ripple it out to other people. Because on the one hand, I understand exactly what you're saying, and we can't get anybody to do anything. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, which is everybody else. And yet, that suffering is so intense, and there's so much of it. It is just impossible to comprehend. I find it so interesting that people are very concerned about animal suffering when it's one animal and they
Right.
see it.
Yeah.
And yet, the overwhelming nature of billions, what do you do with that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think one of the things I do is I think the underlying principle is the excruciating pain of knowing and caring about the suffering of the animals, that we have to turn that into action. So that's one of the reasons we give thousands of events. We're just, I like, because there is an urgency, right? That's what you're saying. There's an urgency to do our best to relieve the suffering of others if we care, and we do care, so we have this urgency. So to do something, but the thing that's so ironic is the more I try to change other people so they'll reduce the suffering, the more they resist and nobody changes. And the more I don't try to change them and just work on myself to embody this, and in the not so much what I'm saying, I don't try to win an argument, but just to be, like Gandhi said, to be the change. The irony is that's when people change, actually. Then they say, wow, I want to be more like you. I want to have that understanding. Somehow exemplify, I guess, is the idea. The ideal, I think, being healthy, for example. I mean, I take, I know you do as well, quite a bit of time every day to really be healthy. I think one of the problems in a lot of in the whole vegan movement is that people don't want to go vegan because they're afraid it might impact their health. They might not get enough protein. They might not get enough, whatever it is, calcium and so forth, different things. And there's quite a bit of energy going into that, I think, right now. And so to consciously understand that doing our best as vegans to be healthy, I mean, to really put in the time. I ride my bike down to the beach every day and take a swim, even in the cold water. And I do lots of exercises and yoga and push-ups and all kinds of things. And I think really staying healthy is important. They have this test where you can test your age. It's by this guy. What's his name? Anyway, you do 7 tests, and your biological age. I'll think of his name in a minute. But anyway, it's called Don't Die. It's the Don't Die app. Brian Johnson, that's his name,
Oh,
Brian Johnson.
yes,
And
yes.
he's
And
actually
he's vegan.
he's basically a vegan. He doesn't call himself a vegan, but he doesn't eat
Yeah,
any animal foods because he
yeah.
wants to live a long life. Anyway, I did this test. I'm 72 years old and my biological age is 22, And so I can say, look, I mean, there's this whole idea that, well, vegans, it might work for a few years, but after you do it 46 years, you're probably going to fall apart. It's like, no, I'm not falling apart. We're thriving.
Yeah.
Madeline's 5 years older than me, so we're thriving. And I think the whole idea is that we're not going to be penalized if we're being kind and loving, right? It's not like it's as you sow, so shall you reap. So if we're doing our best to plant seeds of health and freedom and joy and abundance and kindness and caring into the infinite web of relations, we're not going to get hit back with being sick and so forth. I mean, it's just to understand that, and we've spent many years working with spiritual healing and working with lots of different ways of understanding health. But I think it's really that's why actually I wrote this book, because a lot of times people think that our health has to do with what we eat only. And I have the 6 keys. And so what we eat and consume, water, air, food, and what we put on our skin, that's only one. And there's also our spiritual practice is really important. There's also our relationships are very important for our health. There's also movement and exercise. There's also connecting with nature. And there's also being creative, like you're talking about, having a purpose, giving birth to new projects that are meaningful. If we don't have those other 5 things besides the food, we won't be that healthy, probably physically. I mean, health is really much more than just food. Food is certainly important, but there's so many more factors. And for us to have this one-dimensional idea that our food is what's going to make us healthy or not, I think it does really, it puts too much pressure on us, first of all, as vegans, because there's so many other things. But to really try to have a radically holistic perspective on this. And then also the thing that I really like to emphasize, and I think you do as well, is that we're not this body. I mean, we have to understand that. We're not this physical body. We are the infinite eternal consciousness that makes this appearance possible for a few short decades while we're here singing our song and doing our dance. But it's very temporary. So every day is precious because we don't know how many we're going to get. And to just devote it as best we can to unfolding the highest potential that we have, that's a day well spent. And so if we do that throughout our life as best we can, we will have lived our life well. And I think that's the main thing. And the momentum that you're talking about of this slaughter of millions, billions of animals every day when we include marine animals, it's horrific. However, there is a perspective that is available when we awaken, I think, spiritually to other dimensions, to higher levels, where we realize that, I don't know how to put it into words, but it's basically, when we get to a high enough level in consciousness, we see everything as it is. And we could maybe change it, but we wouldn't change anything, quite honestly. It is how it's supposed to be. This is a school. It's not what the ego wants it to be. It's what it is. Mm-hmm. And so it's how do we respond to the situation? That's the thing. And so the suffering of the animals calls forth a response from us, and we're tested in a sense.
Yes, yes.
So
Well, some
it
people
is.
would say it's military school.
The military.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt.
no, it's a school. The other way I like to look at it more recently is it's like a gymnasium, right? You know, it's like
Mm,
if you go to a gym and you get there and you're all ready to get stronger, and you look around and the weights are only 2 pounds, 1 pound, 3 pounds, you think, well, this is a gym. I mean, I can't get strong with only these little weights. So Earth is a gymnasium with heavy weights. you can get strong because you've
yeah,
got to lift. You get challenged. It seems very real.
yes.
And so again, I think, not to minimize the suffering of these creatures in any way, but also to understand that, sure, they're incredible suffering. I mean, it's agony, pain, everything, and then it's over. Then they leave their body. And at that moment, it's like, it's happened to me, if I can be in agony and then something takes it away, it's like, then it's just a memory. It's like it never happened. It never happened. I mean, on some level it happened, and it is happening, but we have to understand just that there's something much bigger going on. It's how we respond to what's happening in
Yeah.
consciousness.
I've been doing a lot with that idea that is very prominent in yoga and other teachings, that the illusory nature of life on earth. And often when you say that or somebody hears it for the first time, it sounds like you're saying this isn't important. Like, so what does it
Right.
matter? Eat anybody you want. It's an illusion anyway. It's not that. It's like being in a play and you want a Tony. I mean, you want to really play that role as well as you can, but you're still going to take your makeup off and go home. And that it's, I mean, I've known this, I've been given this message. I've been very fortunate that I had a really spiritual grandmother age nanny who brought me up on a lot of this stuff. But it's only recently really unfolding for me. And it kind of came in that John Lennon line in Strawberry Fields, nothing is real and nothing to get hung about. And it's that second line that's like, oh, you know, it's real as a play, and so we have to do a good job. But there's nothing to get hung about, man. So I
Right.
wanted to talk a little bit about your books and kind of their evolution. So tell us about, the three of them, and I'm particularly interested in the one that is about freedom, food freedom and how those things come together.
Yeah, well, the World Peace Diet took off and it got translated into 20 languages, and we traveled all over the world, and it's still actually selling quite a bit. And I didn't really feel like I needed to write any more books. I edited a few books, and then when COVID came, I felt like, there's such a loss of our freedom as human beings. And I think our enslavement of animals boomerangs back. I could see, I talk a lot in the World Peace Diet about the boomerang effect, like whatever you sow, so shall you reap. And I was struck by how easily we can lose our freedoms, our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of bodily autonomy, all these different freedom of the press. They all started to evaporate. And so I felt like somebody should write a book that would give the sort of the big picture of the consequences of animal agriculture, not only to the animals, which is the main thing. I mean, the main thing is to stop eating animals for them, not for us, but for them. But also, if we really want to have a life ourselves of health and freedom and abundance and harmony and caring, then our imprisonment of them has become, and abuse of them has really become something that we've got to just really look at. And so the irony was that I saw so many people who were practicing veganism seeming to be very willing to just give up freedom and to cancel culture emerge. And we're going, don't say this and don't say that, and this whole taking away of freedom of speech. And then there was this other group, a very big group of people who wanted to protect freedom, and they were big-time meat eaters and said, we want to all go to the land and grow our own animals and eat them and be free. And I just thought, this is, somebody needs to be in the middle here and say, look, let's have freedom, but let's also give freedom to the animals too, and create some kind of a third way where we honor animals, we honor ourselves, and we question the takeover. I see this takeover of what I call the plutocrats. It's 1/10,000th of 1% of humanity has managed over the decades and centuries to accumulate so much wealth that they effectively control a lot of the institutions in our society, education and media and Hollywood and a lot of governmental. And so I think for us to just do our best at the grassroots level to go vegan and spread the vegan message as a message of freedom. Because what veganism is, the interesting thing, like there's always this tension between veganism and environmentalism. A lot of times environmentalists will say, well, we got to go into that island. There's too many pigs there. We're going to kill all the pigs. And the vegans say, no, those are pigs. They're beings. You can't just kill them. Look, they're non-native species. We got to get rid of them. They're bad for the environment. And the vegans say, but they're individuals. And so I think, this understanding, veganism is really about honoring individual liberty, honoring individual freedom, honoring individual dignity and integrity. That's really the message that Jesus brought, I think, in many ways. It's really the core of the Western tradition. You honor the individual. And I think that's a very precious idea. The individual is, rightly understood, is everyone, but we also have to see the individual within the context of the whole, which is sort of the Asian traditions have that more in place. Like there isn't any there's no self; it's all an arising. So, but the idea essentially is in spirituality is we honor the individual autonomy of individuals and respect them, and we also do what's best for everyone. And so for me, veganism is like perfect for both. It really is the best for all the systems, for the environmental systems, for our health, for our society, to feed everyone, and it honors the individual. And yet, that conversation isn't happening, really. It's just not being talked about. And it's a hard one. Most people, it's got politicized. You've got blue and red, and you've got people just like don't even say anything, and then all these other things get added on. If you think that, then you must think like that and that and that, and then Trump comes along and people freak out. You must be all these divisive elements. And I think It's that divisiveness that's really, in many ways, part of the main part of the problem. But I think it's also being it's being exacerbated by social media and by just the way we are with each other nowadays. So that's why we like to travel physically and see people and not just do things on the screen and just,
Yeah.
be like regular people and try to, in a way, get back to the good old days. I mean, I think when I think back to the 1950s, when I was born in the 60s, we never locked our door. We didn't have to wear all these protective devices. We trusted each other. We did things. I mean, there was much more fundamental sanity, I think, in our society. And it seems like it's important to try to bring that back and see each other as human beings and not just in terms of our political beliefs and to listen to each other, to really listen, learn to listen. I think that's one of the most important things as vegans we can do to each other and to pre-vegans or non-vegans, to listen and just radiate a sense of loving kindness and willingness to cooperate and hear each other's truths, because there's a lot of misinformation really that's spread, and that causes division because some people will see that it's misinformation, other people won't, and you get people fighting, and that's the problem. So
Well, there's a lot of fighting, obviously, in the outside world, and I think within movements. I know the vegan movement best, but I would imagine if you talk to people in any other kind of forward moving movement, I guess that's why they
right.
call them movements. They're probably having some of the same things. In fact, I was talking today with someone about, is there anybody who is truly admired by all? And when we put it into AI, which is a whole other situation, but what popped up, we got Tom Hanks and Dolly Parton. And it's kind of like, but everybody loves Dolly Parton. I mean, there's just something about her talent, her
Mm,
vulnerability, and she's got the down home from the holler thing and all glitzy rich. And she's somehow, in her person, brought everything and everybody together. But in a country this size, that AI could only come up with two names was really interesting. And it didn't
yeah.
used to be like that. It used to be, you know, lots of people were admirable even if we didn't agree with everything they had to say.
Right. I think that's really true. It's yeah, we build people up and tear them down, and everybody gets attacked. I was just reading a book. It's very interesting called The Perennial Philosophy by
Oh,
Aldous
Aldous
Huxley,
Huxley.
and he has a line, a sentence in there, just kind of in passing, that I think in a way explains a lot. He said he's talking about spirituality, but also about cultures, and he says that human beings basically can cooperate and get along well as long as it's a group size of maybe 50 to 80, maybe 100. Once you get beyond that, it gets difficult because you've got to have some kind of representative kind of a thing. When you have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of people, you are going to have always just real conflict. He said he doesn't see how even far into the future, if we if this will ever be a solvable problem, that we can't, some kind of a socialist or some kind of pure capitalist republic or whatever kind of system we try to create, we're just too many of us
Hmm.
that there will be, there's always nepotism, right? No matter what, there'll be groups that kind of favor each other and control and get influence and run things how they want. And I mean, you have to think of a completely different human being that is completely spiritually enlightened,
Hmm. Well,
or yeah.
our friend Judy Carmen, Homo Ahimsa.
Right, right.
If we could, with ahimsa being nonviolence,
Nonviolence,
non-harming, if we could
right?
evolve into that. Now, where do we find you? Worldpeacediet.com, is that the best place?
Yes, Victoria. Yeah, that's the best place. The
Okay.
videos are, we have links there. Our schedule of traveling, our training that we do, the World Peace Diet Facilitator training, Madeline's cooking videos, and essays. Yeah, it's the best place.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, welcome home.
Thank you.
Rest up, and
Yeah,
thank you so much. And everybody out there, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for thinking. And let's just get out and make Main Street vegan.
bless you. Thank you.